Hi, everybody, and welcome to Connecting to Game. I'm Andrei and Marc. I'm one of your two hosts, and I'm joined in the studio by
Marc Lachenez, the other host of this podcast.
Yay. Yeah, we finally are recording the brand new reimagined episodes here in downtown Montreal, and it's wonderful to get started. What we have for you today is, hopefully, a timely discussion of Summer Game Fest 2024. What is it? Who runs it? What does it mean? And especially like our takeaways about where games companies are right now with the kinds of releases they're pushing forward. What does it mean for big franchises? And how we're hyped but also kind of tired.
Yeah, so Andrei is gonna go into a bit of a discussion about how Summer Games Fest works, who is Jeff Keighley, what's he all about, what kind of media machine has he built around games advertising and marketing in the wake of E3, and we're going to close the discussion with kind of a reaction, an effective reaction, the way we felt after Summer Games Fest, which for me, and a little bit for Andrei too, but definitely a lot for me, was just kind of like games marketing and hype fatigue.
Yeah.
So let's get into it, man.
This is the 5th edition of Summer Game Fest, so they're titled with their yearly sort of watermark. So this is Summer Game Fest 2024. The show has been running for about 5 years, but I would say it's never been more important in terms of the space it occupies for the American and the, let's say, Western European games industry. I really do want to like localize that a little bit to say, this isn't really taking over the game space for Southeast Asian games out of Korea or for Japanese games. It's a very specific kind of thing. Within that, this show has effectively now taken over the slot that used to be reserved for E3. And because of that, I think it's really important to contrast both, to explain to our audience what is the difference between the two of them. So, the big byline of this is it's a show to showcase upcoming tech, AAA, and indie games for consumers and for industry people to attend and to go report on these, to check out booths, to go schedule meetings. E3 was forever sort of a run by all of its meeting rooms that were around the tech showcases that we as audiences would see there. Summer Games Fest is a bit different. And the big difference has been that E3 was run by sort of a committee, right? It was a organized event that ran for the better part of 20-some years and was run by its own advisory board. It had press passes. It was very run by committee in a way. And Summer Games Fest is way more Jeff Keighley's baby.
Yeah, I think it's important too to say that like E3 was, although there was a lot of, certainly when we were younger, coverage of it in magazines and on television shows, it felt like an insider's space. It was really up until I believe the last year that they ran it, or the couple years before, where they were actually inviting the public to go try stuff. It really was for the press as part of a marketing apparatus, and for other companies as well. I think a lot of networking happened in E3 as well. And again, this is a different format. This is, again, there are obviously insiders involved here, but it's marketed more as a public consumption product than it is like a trade show.
Yeah. Well, it is sort of a trade show still.
Sure, but that's not what it looks like, is all I'm saying. Yeah.
Exactly. From our end of things, it really seems like a bonanza of trailers. Part of that is because so many companies have spun off their own shows in recent years. This is partly what led to E3 sort of atrophying and dying away. There's the UB Forward, there's the Xbox Showcase. Nintendo does its own live events that are spread out throughout the year. Sony just had its Days of Play State of the Union, I guess, last Thursday, so a day before Summer Game Fest. So Summer Game Fest sort of builds on top of those shows, but it doesn't give them a platform anymore. We're past that era. The other part is, well, who gets to have trailers at Summer Game Fest? So for some of you who are listening to this, I imagine you may have heard of the Esquire piece that came out about this and then ran through Eurogamer, Kotaku, Polygon. What does it cost to get one of these? So the nominal price of getting any trailer at Summer Game Fest on screen, and this is the same as the Game Awards actually, which we're not talking about today, but is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. It's about $250,000 US dollars for 1 minute trailers, and that ramps up to about $550,000 for a 2.5 minute trailer. So $500,000 is not out of reach if you want to have 2 minutes on that stage. Some of you may notice, and we're going to be talking about this, some showcases run way longer than 2 minutes, some run way shorter, and the process is very nebulous about who gets to bid for those slots. And there's talk of the fact that Jeff Keighley himself can give out free slots to indie developers that he deems worthy or that he's interested in, which is part of the problem and also an interesting thing to talk about. One person gets to sort of decide. I would imagine there's a lot of indie developers that wouldn't be happy with that being the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like it's good to be an executive, you know? Like, yep. Jeff Keighley, certainly publicly, it seems the man has done a lot of groundwork to get himself in that position. And also just, you know, for some scale references, how much does 30 seconds at the Super Bowl cost? A cursory Google lets me know that's around $7 million. So, you know, it seems like a hefty amount, but as far as ad bucks go for a large studio, it's actually like not enormous. But if you're coming from that indie, that indie space, and you're trying to just get your foot in the door in the public consciousness through some kind of grassroots advertising, or this would be larger than grassroots advertising, making a public splash, unless you get, you know, that free slot, you got to pay quite a bit of cash.
Yeah, and to his credit, Jeff Keighley could charge way more for these. I think at the level of concentration that Summer Game Fest occupies right now, in terms of the sort of like, it tees up the releases that then the awards will pick up later down the cycle, either with more developed trailers once gameplay is out, or with awards, right? So there's like it could be much worse, but that doesn't mean it can't be better or that we can have a bit more transparency. I'm very much sort of on the notion that companies need to be as transparent as possible with the sort of data that they have on this. Obviously, there's no reason for them to do that. But I think you're hitting the nail on the head, Mark, when you talk about, like, this isn't an issue for EA. It's not an issue for Blizzard. It's not an issue for anybody who has the money to be a part of these and to fund these $100 million productions. Yeah. It's punitively expensive for people who do not have access to that. So it's either a number that doesn't matter at all for big companies, or that is prohibitively expensive for smaller companies. And the fact that the free slots are sort of given out without any indication of what the selection process is for those, that's a problem, right? Why one small studio over another? So
that's a really good question. Yeah, and it's something to look into. It's also interesting in terms of like the companies that can most afford to do this. I mean, there are clear partnerships between, you know, Summer Game Fest, Keighley's whole apparatus, and some of the Japanese companies that get featured a lot. Like obviously Kojima and Keighley have a relationship. Capcom is always showing up there. But a lot of the larger studios have just completely divested and basically market all their material internally, either before or after something like the Game Awards or Summer Game Fest. So yeah, it's really interesting what level of game developer this kind of media product, this kind of advertising is what it is. It's a Summer Games Fest, but it's a giant commercial. Like, let's be honest. Who is this most for? When it's the indies who probably need that spotlight the most, but it's really kind of a select few game companies who, you know, who really kind of are the draw, I suppose. Yeah. And that's a really important thing to talk about from this year's Summer Games Fest, I think, if you want to get into that now.
Yeah, so I mean, for people who watch these, you've probably noticed that there's a sort of ebb and flow to the pacing of the show. It starts with something mid to large size, then it'll like feature a bunch of smaller indie productions or updates. Then it'll have some kind of big midway point. It'll crest down for a little bit, and then there's a final reveal. And so for this year, I would say a relatively soft Summer Games Fest release slate in terms of like how bombastic the trailers are, especially compared to something like the Game Awards last fall. But for me, the two things that are really interesting about this Summer Game Fest is, one, ending on Monster Hunter Wilds, which was also shown recently at I'm pretty sure at the Days of Play Sony event.
A gameplay trailer did drop before this one.
Yeah. And
so it's not like a world exclusive. It's not a world premiere.
No, this year it was a bit softer on that, but it's interesting because Capcom is a mid-large studio. I wouldn't put it at the size of something like Ubisoft right now, but it is storied. It has an incredibly long history within the games industry going all the way back to the 80s, and it seems like there's still believers in this kind of exhibition format for their trailers.
For sure.
Compared to something like Ubisoft where it's all in-house now. The other part that really was like the candy for me and probably incredibly vexing to a lot of game developers was the like 11-minute showcase of the new Jason Blumhouse Game Studio production in the middle. Which was, for folks who didn't watch, Blumhouse has announced that they have a game studio in-house now. Blumhouse Productions has been making, lean cutting horror movies for the past 15 years. They launched James Wan's career. If you've loved movies like Insidious or Paranormal Activity, they're sort of around that space, right? They've been very present in that, and Jason Blum has talked about how to run business at scale for a very long time. Now I'm pretty sure Blum has merged operations with Jason Wan, who had launched before. But to put that aside for a second, the games part of this is really the studio launched and they're like, we're making 9 horror games that are all differing ranges of like indie looking productions.
Yeah.
They're not AAA productions. They're definitely not like single developer productions either. They're sitting somewhere in that zone, and we'll have to wait to see what that's like. But it was really interesting to hear them talk about how they're going to be pushing the envelope on interactive entertainment and doing things that have never been seen before. All these promises that we hear like every 5 years from developers.
But this I think is really important because it is kind of the Game Awards Summer Game Fest project in a nutshell, right? Where we're not starting. This has been happening for a long time, but like it's being hammered home that we're getting more traditional Hollywood film, TV production ways of doing things coming into the game space, and somehow these legacy traditional media format folks are now going to innovate on the interactive media format of games, right? And as though people in games haven't been doing that the entire time, right?
It's interesting to me too because aiming at horror games they have the same kind of perennial entertainment quality as horror movies.
Yeah. And
they also work at lower budget points. They're not like, you don't need every horror game to be the next Spider-Man game.
For sure. Yeah. All you need is, you pump out enough and a few of them will go viral on Twitch or something, right? And that's kind of what the allure of this is that lean production, like you said. These are ideally for them, I think, going to be fairly cheap to make. Like if they're like, we're promising 9 out of the gate, it's going to be a volume.
The other
thing.
part of this too is like these games are being funded by film revenue.
Yeah.
They're not. The business model is inherently different because they're being fed by an industry that is way more lucrative for Blum, and we won't really know whether this is a successful project initiative for them until so there's 6 games actually that were revealed in development, and it's only going to be after these are out that we're going to get a sense of did this work or not for the company.
Absolutely.
It is interesting to me that is by far the showcase that commanded the most time on that stage.
Yeah.
It wasn't any big AAA production, nor was it any small indie or AA game, which is something that I've been privately ranting about for like a year and a half.
But I actually don't think it's surprising at all. No. Given like the move away from the E3 trade show, that was really, game developer focused presentation for other game developers and the gaming press, where now Keighley is really appealing to cross-platform markets, and both in terms of who's developing the games that you're seeing with this Blumhouse collaboration, and who's playing the games, right?
Yeah. Who's it for, right? This is the thing where I'm trying to ask myself, like, are these game reveals that are intended to appeal to horror game fans, to people who are sort of around the space and haven't really played these kinds of games, or is it intended to appeal to people who are fans of Blumhouse productions and are like, maybe I will try a game. Maybe I will get into one of these if it's like stamped with the, seal of approval of this successful studio that we recognize as a workhorse inside of the industry.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is kind of the dearth of big titles this year. And to be clear, there were a lot of reveals that came out of the Ubisoft sort of the Ubi Forward that was held on Sunday, I think, and the discussion of games like Anno, Assassin's Creed Shadows got a big reveal, Star Wars Outlaws got a big reveal. Like, these are still strong fall contenders. Ubisoft is backloading a lot of AAA into the fall, as they usually do. The Days of Play conference also had some stuff in terms of Monster Hunter, in terms of the upcoming Wukong sort of Dark Souls-like game that's coming out in August.
Right.
There's still a lot of stuff. SGF wasn't the place where they were.
No.
There were some things, but mostly it was reserved for, like, Dragon Ball Z is getting a new Budokai game, Sparking Zero, not Sparkling. That's sparkling water.
I would play Sparkling Zero. Is that a water? I would play that drink.
Maybe.
Okay, moving on.
And then there's a Capcom SNK crossover for Street Fighter, some DLC announcements for that. There's Mecha Break, which I'm pretty sure was revealed at this. I suppose the big announcements really were the full playthrough / longer discussion of Metaphor Refantasio. This is the new title from Atlas, makers of the Persona franchise. It effectively looks like Persona, but in an alternate, like, steampunky world.
Let's go.
I'm in.
Yep, I'm in.
I'm historically not the biggest Persona enjoyer, mostly because I don't really vibe with the modern context of the games. So this is, like, looking great for me. That game occupied maybe like a 5-minute, one of the larger slots for sure, but not necessarily the largest one out of those. Maybe the biggest early reveal was Sid Meier Civilization 7, followed by a really endearing video of Sid Meier talking, which made me cry, and we all got very emotional. It's like, he's been around for like 30-some years.
No gameplay though, right? It was just
it was literally just the sort of like Green Band announcement trailer that had like the cinematic overview of like, is this Civ? Is this not? It's Civ. And then just Sid Meier talking for a while, which was interesting. And then, this is not to be disparaging of anybody else. There's things like there's an Alan Wake 2 DLC coming out. There was, I suppose, fairly spirited showcase for Dune Awakening, but it was also a story cinematic.
Yeah, I would really like some gameplay from that, as that's the kind of game that is more my jam.
And a fair amount of smaller indie titles. I suppose another one of the big ones was the announcement of Valorant coming to consoles. But yeah, nothing, not to the scale that we saw like last fall when the Game Awards was just like, it was just blasting every 2 minutes was just like a new world premiere.
Yeah, it's another
trailer.
World premiere. Is this, I guess that begs the question, is Summer Games Fest a B show? Or is this indicative of like a broader change of kind of the larger profile titles, the larger companies moving away? Or is it just that there's nothing to show right now?
I think it's a bit of all of the above. So I think we're just at a point now where things that are going to be releasing in the near future have already been announced a lot. So Wukong has had a bunch of trailers. That's one of the big releases. Rise of the Ronin just released. Ubisoft is announcing their own stuff and releasing it. That's coming out in the fall. Like that was a really short turnover too. They did the Ubi Forward like a month and a half ago, and they were like, yeah, this is the new AC. It's coming out in like 6 months.
Right.
So the turnover like happened kind of in between both shows. So it's just like a bit of a timing issue, I think, with where some development cycles are. Destiny just released a new expansion. It's not doing promo for that content yet, although they did do a showcase yesterday.
Well, they did their own showcase, right? And this is
Yeah.
part of the thing is like, now that this is all online, now that folks are just kind of tuning in via YouTube, right, to this broadcast, any company with enough like public social credibility can really just be like, we're doing our own showcase now. What do you think is the incentive for those larger companies to kind of team up with the Game Awards and Summer Games Fest? The Game Awards has a different valence to it because there is like this the idea of prestige that surrounds an award, even though are they really giving an award? You know what I mean? The award is an advertising stamp of approval.
I think that's the main difference, right? So if you think of Summer Game Fest last year, that was when we had the Nick Cage Dead by Daylight announcement. There was also the one with The Rock.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to do a similar thing. I guess Jason Blum is that here.
Yes.
But the award part, and I really do think of them not as an A and B show, but as part 1 and part 2. I think the weight is definitely on the Game Awards. Keighley has had way more time to refine the format of that show, which we can have opinions about, you know, the balance of promotional material relative to awards and who gets to be on stage. It's a discussion that we have with the Oscars every year as well. It's not isolated to games, and the companies are invested in the Game Awards directly, right? The advisory board is made up of these corporations like Microsoft, like Blizzard, and Kojima is a board member as well, because Kojima Productions sits on that sort of advisory board that selects the jury that will be voting on the awards. So they're involved in a very different way. This seems more straightforwardly just like a promotional event.
Right.
And it's early summer, so ideally you would think that they are promoting stuff for the fall, but it almost feels like this fall is sort of like we just had like the big, 2023 was by many metrics one of the best years for game releases in terms of how well they did financially, how many awards they won in the case of Baldur's Gate, and how well received they were even for those that didn't, like Spider-Man 2, like Alan Wake. This year seems to be a bit more of an open field. I mean, I suppose there's an Elden Ring DLC coming out very soon, but mostly it seems to be like Ubisoft is running the table between Rebels or Outlaws. I always get my Star Wars franchise IPs mixed up.
Well, now there's so much Star Wars that I think it can be forgiven.
Yeah. So Outlaws is coming out at the end of the summer. There was the Prince of Persia platformer at the start of the year. There's a Prince of Persia indie title that's also being well received that just came out. There's the upcoming Shadows game. And they're also releasing, I think, Annos next year. And then it's a bit more like mid-sized small titles. Senua, Hellblade 2 Hellblade 2 Senua's Journey. Senua's something.
She sacrificed in the first one.
Yeah, I can't remember.
What's she doing now? We don't know.
That one landed a bit softly. And Destiny's having a big moment right now with the final release, which we'll talk about in a couple episodes, I think, when we're talking about some more like seasonal storytelling. But it's not as packed. It felt like last year you couldn't wrap your arms around the insane amount of games that were coming out, matched with equally massive layoffs across the industry, like on every studio.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good time to transition to talking about the hype thing, because, and yet, it still feels, after we've gone through not just the Games Fest, but the Xbox Showcase, the Ubisoft Showcase, Bungie doing their own thing for Destiny, World of Warcraft just released their new trailers for their next expansion, and for Diablo. There's actually quite a bit coming out soon in a pretty condensed period, and I like a good game. I mean, I like being excited for games to come out. It's something to look forward to. Passes the time in my mind where I'm like, that's going to be fun to jump around and team up with Wookiees or whatever. But this year, even for the new Monster Hunter, I saw that trailer as like the capstone trailer of Summer Games Fest, and I was like, I think I feel a bit dead inside, because it's a lot. And I feel like we've been here before.
Do you think that part of that is the job that we have outside of being consumers?
I mean, maybe this is a good thing to get some feedback on, because again, we do games research. We play a lot of games. We talk about games almost all day long. And yet I still see my colleagues love games, and I still love games. But I found certainly the marketing here, just kind of the saturation of it. I mean, how many titles? Do you have a number for how many titles actually were premiered at Summer Games Fest?
Not on hand. I could do the math real quick, but it's definitely over 15 in the main showcase, if you're thinking of like everything.
It has to be way over 15.
Yeah. And then there's Day of the Devs. Think of like most of the individual press releases feature 4 to 5 games. Like, it's not unreasonable to say that we were just bombarded with about like 60 to 70 games worth of marketing material,
especially
in the span of a week.
Definitely across all the showcases. Yeah. And at a certain point, I found it difficult to be excited about any of them, because even a lot of the smaller titles that like, oh, that looks like a good idea, oh, that's cute, and then mixed in with, oh, that looks like a Fortnite game, it all became so tiring that by the end of the week, I finally got to the new Dragon Age, which recently changed its name to now I think it's the Veilguard.
No longer Dreadwolf.
No longer Dreadwolf, which, you know, I'm sure they have their reasons. Dreadwolf's a really cool title, though.
To me, it was the better of the two. The Dreadwolf, I mean, I suppose some micro spoilers, because we're going to be talking about... I think the Dragon Age Veilguard trailer and gameplay, so the cinematic and the gameplay trailer are kind of exemplary of what we have as an issue. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that.
Just a little bit.
If you don't want to know anything, maybe, skip ahead.
Yeah, but it's more going to be a reaction to those things. But overall, by the time I got to that trailer and then the gameplay footage, I was long past caring about the new games that were coming out. And I also, this doubles with a thing that we've seen in, gaming community discourses for many years now about like, don't believe the hype. A lot of the old E3 video packages of like, this is real gameplay footage, but it's a completely staged section of gameplay that is effectively a ludic cinematic, right? Those kinds of things still happen. And I think it's very easy, if you've gotten to where I've gotten, to not have any faith in the marketing of the game and just have to wait and trust for the product once it arrives. Like, to me, this fully serves as just telling me that something is going to be here, because after things like Anthem as a large example of like the marketing really made this seem like it was the second coming of
certainly
an
almost
online
got me
FPS in space.
Third person,
right?
Yes.
And it's not the only one of those. People who play games have been burned by the marketing before many times, and now I see that it's less hands-on. Like, the E3 is a trade show. There was way more playable stuff on the floor. This really is almost entirely promotional.
There's also a thing to consider in terms of where are these trailers launching from in terms of the company's position of power or relative lack thereof. So, for example, take Bungie as an example, right? All the marketing material for the final shape really came from a moment in the development cycle of that game where people were not feeling good about it.
Right.
The content was fine for the last year, post Lightfall, all the seasons, but Lightfall as an expansion really did not do it. Received middling reviews. It was kind of brigaded for a bunch of reasons. I personally didn't enjoy the gameplay all that much, but I did play the subsequent seasons somewhat. And they were rocked by just an enormous wave of layoffs of people who seemed to be core participants inside of the game's development, like Michael Salvatore for the soundtrack, or Liana Ruppert for just like all the social and all the This Week at Bungie posts. people who had been, designers for decades. And people were kind of like, I don't know if this is going to hit. It's a hard sell to wrap up the franchise after a decade. They're not doing it with the people that we love, that we know made good product. And then the expansion came out, and it's good. By all accounts, people really love what this current version of Destiny is. And then they reveal the DLCs, which I think if they had revealed them at a week prior to this releasing, people would have been like, this looks like the same old stuff. Can we really believe? But now the vibe is a bit better, right? So releasing from a position of weakness or strength is good or bad.
I suppose the vibe in terms of the relationship to like what is the state of the game, but I think you actually touched on something else that is really maybe subconsciously affecting the way I felt about Summer Games Fest and all the trailers. We know and work with a bunch of people who have been laid off from the games industry, and like I think it's hard to go in to anything like that with any kind of excitement when like your friends who may have worked on these titles are now out of a job.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting, or it's incongruous for us to kind of have this celebratory event where Jeff Keighley's out on stage with his grin and going like, and here's another premiere, and we're supposed to be excited and be like, oh, what's next? What's next? And it's like, what's next? More layoffs? Like it's.
He did open the show by mentioning that we should all be collectively thankful for the people who were impacted by layoffs, which I suppose is improvement from last year where it wasn't even mentioned.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But like, that's being thankful doesn't put food on their tables, man. No. That is a larger discussion, and we're not going to get so far into that. But I did find it difficult, really, to even be hyped. I don't think there was a single trailer I saw this year where I was just like, yeah, I'm fully in. I was kind of sad the whole time, but that leads me to you because you're the hype guy, and I'm not really the hype guy. In terms of like, I don't get sucked into the hype except for like the last Dune movie, which I couldn't wait for. That was like the last thing where I've been like, this is going to be amazing. And then it delivered for me. But for a game, I haven't really had that recently. Yeah. But for you, so are you hyped coming out of this past week?
Collectively, yeah.
Okay.
I think overall, there's enough big titles that I feel excited for what's coming up. Some more than others. I do have to say, like, I'm fresh off of finally getting my hands around Spider-Man 2 from Insomniac. So I'm like, yeah, games are great. Like when they're good, they're good. And Insomniac is one of those studios that I think like launches from positions of relative strength like all the time. They've only been like putting out fantastic games. Same thing for like Sony Santa Monica and Naughty Dog. Those don't have any titles that are like on the looming horizon right now. But there are a couple. So obviously I'm the resident Ubisoft guy, I suppose is one of the ways that I'm thinking about this. I was relatively lukewarm on Assassin's Creed Shadows when the first trailer dropped. Not for any of the reactionary reasons that some people are not into it, but just in terms of like, it's nice to have another full title out of the gate. I just played Mirage earlier this year. It was great, but I wanted something a bit more robust, and this certainly seems that way. I'm happy that we're finally getting, two protagonists. They're doing a full I suppose it's Sengoku Japan or like right post Sengoku. I'm a bit unclear exactly on like the time frame that they're aiming with this, but it looks good, and it looks. I also enjoyed Ghost of Tsushima when it came out, so I'm like I'm relatively like, the field feels positive for me for this game to succeed. Right. I'm also playing the Prince of Persia Lost Crown game right now, and I'm like, that's also good. So that game for me is really active. The other game that I'm really excited about is Black Myth Wukong, which is coming out of a studio that I'd never heard about before called Game Science. I don't know if they've made anything else that I've played. I don't think so. And this is an adaptation of Journey to the West, right? Like the myth of the Monkey King, but done in very much like a Dark Souls large way. The trailers have been coming out for the better part of 2 years. It looks incredibly ornate.
It does.
And I'm excited. This is like, it's my genre of game. It's doing the myth adaptation stuff, which I like. It's unknown, so there's like a degree of like, I wonder what I'm going to see. Is it going to be callbacks to all the things that I already love, or is it going to be like new stuff that I will be surprised by? Like, there's enough space between what I expect and what I have no idea about to like really generate a lot of excitement. Civ also is in that space where I'm like, I played a lot of Civs. I don't play them as religiously as some of our colleagues, but I'm really excited to sit down with friends again and to play more of it when the next one comes out.
Yeah, and I suppose there is something in the allure of like that Civ game. We know it's going to be a Civ game, but the small iterations that they're going to make on it, we're kind of in that zone right now. We're like, it could be anything.
What leader?
They could decide to do anything.
How does tech work?
Exactly.
How does tourism work?
Can I stack my units?
Like, well, hope not. that was not a gameplay decision I liked.
Yeah.
So there's these three. I'm excited, but in a tempered way, about Star Wars Outlaws, mostly because my partner is like a lifelong Star Wars fan, and she is excited about it. And she's not as burnt out as I am on Star Wars media, so there's like some, like lingering positive affect for this to succeed.
I think for any like Star Wars fan, like I was a big Star Wars fan when I was a kid, and I had hope all through. Not just a new hope, but a renewed hope all through like the Disney era of Star Wars. Pretty much every time something new came out, and more often than not, I was disappointed.
Yeah,
Andor maybe being like one exception, some of Mando, but like even every time there's a new Star Wars game, the possibility is there that it retaps into that initial love for the thing. I mean, that's a nostalgia question, which we're going to be getting into in another episode of this pod later. But so I guess, there is some room for hype, but this is where I'm finding in the marketing, maybe I've just been disappointed too often by the properties I've had faith in. Although I do think you touched on a really important thing, which is to say you're generally excited, and I am as well. I'm not specifically excited for any single game, but like I know for a fact that good games are going to continue to come out. Some of those games were not marketed anywhere in any of these events.
I do have one I can talk about, which was marketed somewhat, I think, in the Xbox and the Days of Play sub conferences, sub shows, Path of Exile 2.
Right.
Which now we are at the like early release, like early access stage at the end of this year. I mean, I'm ready. I've been waiting for this to materialize for the better part of like 6 years. I'm a lifelong player of Diablo. I played Path of Exile 1 from like alpha to, well, like this year. Less than I used to, but there's so much content there where it's like it's a deluge of, even if it all doesn't hit, I know there's going to be stuff that I'm going to love in that game.
Right.
And that's exciting. And it's exciting for me because I imagine that will be the case for most of the people I play it with, and that's exciting. And in that way, like I have that with Path of Exile. I have that somewhat with Destiny right now, where I'm like, I'm not in on the last expansion, but I'm going to be getting there imminently. And I imagine for you, this may be the case with World of Warcraft, with War Within, that is also like in this space of like, we've known about it for a while, but now they're starting to do trailers and like...
I don't think that's hype though. I think what that is the inertia of pretty much every WoW expansion. I'm going to at least play it for the first month that it's out.
That's fair.
It's woven into my being, and I will always be excited for something new, even if their hit rate on delivering on good expansions is like 50%, but the broader thing here that I'm trying to get at is like the joy or value of the experience of playing the games that are coming out over the next year have almost nothing to do with how they were marketed in this concentrated, showcased mechanism to me, aside from giving me the awareness that in the future, this game is going to be on the market and I can purchase it or subscribe to it or play it for free. And in so doing, I may find something really worthwhile there. And I don't know, I suppose, it's okay to be hyped. It's also okay to not be hyped. Good games are still coming out. new exciting mechanics are still going to be in games. Interesting ways of telling stories are still going to be there. And what games end up doing those things, we can't tell from this, no matter what they tell us, no matter what Blumhouse comes out and tells us about how they're going to reinvent horror, right? No matter how they spruce up the Dragon Age trailer to make it look like a Critical Role heist, and then the gameplay footage for that comes out and it looks nothing like the trailer. Like, until the day that a bunch of people are playing these things, including yourself, and you can make that judgment for yourself, reserve your excitement unless that excitement is doing something really good for you. I think, I don't know, that's where I'm at, because case in point, Elden Ring, one of the biggest games of recent memory, I never watched a single trailer, and I didn't care about the game until the week before it came out, and I was like, I'll give this a shot. And it was one of the best experiences I've had playing a game, and I think it is partially directly because I knew nothing about it, and I was just like, I've heard this is going to be good, so I'll give it a shot. And my God, was it? And I think knowing less made it the best version of that game it could be for me.
I think having some horizon for exploration is like really important to really, like, you can get in the door on hype, but there needs to be substance there to like keep you glued to the game. I think one of the things that you hit on that's really interesting, though, is like people feeling the need to be hyped.
Yeah.
Like, there's like kind of like almost a performative, like, hyper fan thing of like, you have to be hyped. You have to cheerlead the industry always.
You don't. It's okay to be measured.
And I think the trailer that has had like the most mixed, strange reception is the Dragon Age Veilguard stuff.
Yeah.
Where, like, for you and me at least, and based on some of the comments
and some other
seeing,
colleagues, I've been in multiple chats about this trailer and then the gameplay footage.
So the gameplay footage looks much better, and there's an amazing Polygon article that just came out today that was like, so the gameplay trailer looks better than that trailer. Like, the headlines are kind of telling you, like, hold on, be measured. Like, one of these salvages the other.
But I do want to like put forward here that there were many folks who did enjoy the trailer.
Yes.
Because that trailer is marketing to a different segment than Dragon Age has marketed towards previously,
I think so,
which is part of the disjuncture of the whole thing, which is like,
it has way more of that Critical Role, like, fantasy, like, action comedy
mixed with a hero shooter, mixed with like it, and
it's just the vibe.
And the
right?
success of the first two Dragon Ages, although the second one was not beloved, but the first one especially was that it was, I mean, Baldur's Gate 3 kind of did this the best recently, but a return to an older style. I don't want to use the word grittier, but like, it kind of was. It was both silly and dark, and this trailer kind of was just silly. And I think
the gameplay was better. Like, it had a bit more of that like eldritch horror feel.
Yeah, but I think these two trailers are so emblematic of like, we actually just can't know.
Yeah, this is a wait for the embargo to lift to get like some more in-depth reviews kind of deal. And to the point earlier, EA BioWare is not in a position of strength.
It's true.
They've been having rough releases for, I mean, Anthem bricked, Mass Effect Andromeda bricked, and Dragon Age has been on hiatus since 2014 for Inquisition. Like, this is... They're not like inspiring confidence in a lot of players.
But the reaction to them not inspiring confidence and the marketing kind of being a partial misfire, and the gameplay not lining up with what the trailer looks like, it being kind of tonally all over the place.
It looks way more like classic Dragon Age when you watch.
Yeah, the gameplay does, sure, but
or like Dragon Age 2.
But how does that line up with what they're marketing? Like, are those teams really talking with each other? If they aren't, that's kind of a misfire. But if they are, maybe there's something we're not seeing in the gameplay footage that trailer is representing about how the game plays out. But this is the whole point of this, which is, regardless of BioWare's current reputation, regardless of the way these trailers looked, it is possible that this game is great, right? And I think, react the way you react to the footage in the trailer, but like, hold the horse on it. You know, it could still be a really good game, and it might be sad. You know, it might be a sad day, but there's no reason to like get the pitchforks out or to get the pom-poms out. You know what I mean? We saw it. It is what it is, and the game will release, and we'll have more info. And there's no reason you got to be there day one. There's no reason you need that pre-order. The experience of play is still going to be there, and a community to share it with is still going to be there, regardless of if you're on the hype train or if you're not.
I mean, I got overworked like hell this past year, and I'm just now playing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
It's as good now as it was in the fall.
Absolutely. Those discussions, the internet is an archive. It's carved into stone. When people comment there, it stays there. You still get to be part of those discussions.
I have my horrible
even
early
if you
takes
wait
about
for a
Elden
review,
Ring.
Right? And why not to get the pitchforks out? Because regardless of how you feel about the companies themselves, there are lots of people in these companies working their hardest to make a good game. It's like the old adage about films: no one sets out to make a bad movie. No one is setting out to make a terrible game. And a lot of people are working really hard. Yeah. So, I mean, even though my hype has kind of permanently been killed by years of disappointment, I'm still excited because lots of great games come out every year, and you don't need to get in 7 months, 8 months, 9 months before that game comes out as a super fan of the thing and really commit to it. And you don't need to brigade against it if one trailer looked bad.
It's probably,
we don't know until the day it hits.
It's probably much healthier to approach these games with interest rather than vested like opinions about them, to basically say like, I'm excited to meet this game on its terms, and maybe it'll succeed or it won't. I mean, we had a discussion not too long ago about like Deathloop kind of being undone by the amount of hype, which then the game didn't meet, but the game is still great. Like, it didn't need to be a 10, and like an 8.59 9 on 10 game is still fantastic.
Oh no, the Deathloop situation is exactly this rubber banding of the marketing being really strong and the game being good to great, but not a perfect 10 incredible. And so the reception to the game, once you do the math, once you do the hype math of it, it ends up being like a 4 to a 6 in people's esteem of the, or even a 0. That game did get a lot of 0 ratings.
1s and 2s.
And the game is, I'm sorry guys, if you're in the 0 camp, the game is not a 0.
I'm in my teacher brain with this, where I'm like a B+ and 85, and that is certainly what that game is to me.
Yeah.
It's not in the A
I like
range.
it a bit more than you do, but I don't think it's perfect, but I do think it was one of the most fun, tight experiences I had in the year it released, where I was just like, this was great and it's done. And that's all a game needs to be sometimes. It can be your Netflix binge that you don't think about again, you know? And that's, but a game being really good at being that is still a good game. All
you
right?
don't need every meal to be the best meal you've ever had.
That's right.
You probably want them to be.
And sometimes you're hyped up for your Big Mac and it doesn't deliver, you know, and you don't go screaming at McDonald's every day. Well, maybe you do. I don't know. I don't really eat fast food. Well, Andrei, that's it for this episode. I think. Did you have a closing note about? Is there anything you wanted to say?
Feel free, like, if you have games that we haven't talked about that you feel are interesting to, add us about, please do so. We're always like looking forward to new things that we didn't think about. And I think we focused on the Summer Game Fest part of this, but we didn't focus too much on Day of the Devs or some of the more indie releases. That's not to disparage them. Games like Neva look great. I just think inside of like the show's structure, they're treated a bit like afterthoughts, which is why I think we kind of talked about them that way.
Yeah.
I'm still super hyped to see a bunch of these smaller games come out.
Absolutely.
And surprisingly, I'm very excited about Anno. I just want to play Pax Romana. And I don't know why. I haven't played an Anno game in like a decade.
The trailer I thought was actually fantastic. Just like they leaned into the cheese a little bit. What is the actual full title of the new Anno game?
I think it's Anno 117 : Pax Romana.
Sure. If you haven't seen that trailer, go take a look at it. It's excellent. There's a Gregorian choir chanting build. I'll spoil that part. It's pretty incredible. And then other than that, I do think we do have to give one final shout out in the closing moment to the Among Us television show that has the most stacked cast I've ever seen, but they provided none of the voiceover work in the trailer for the show itself. And so are all those actors giving a silent film performance? I don't know. It could be the case. But really looking forward to seeing how that pans out.
All right. Until next time.
Yeah, thanks for listening, guys. We're connecting the game.